I didn't always know the power of going slow. In fact, there was a time I would have laughed at the idea, back when I thought rushing meant I was accomplishing something. But somewhere between missing the moments and chasing goals that kept slipping further away, I began to wonder, what was I really racing toward? And what was I leaving behind? Now, in the quiet pace of my later years, I see things differently, and I'd like to share a story, not a dramatic one, not one full of twists or triumphs, just a quiet, honest story. Mine, about how I came to see slowing down not as defeat, but as awakening. Would you sit with me for a while? I don't remember what exactly I was rushing for that morning. Maybe it was a grocery run, a doctor's appointment, or something I had scribbled on a to-do list the night before. All I know is that I was moving fast, faster than necessary. My keys weren't where they should have been. The kettle boiled over, and I had put on two different socks without realizing it. But none of that stopped me. I was caught in a kind of invisible current, pushed forward by some unseen urgency. And then it happened. In the middle of tying my shoes, I suddenly felt a strange tightness in my chest. I paused, not out of mindfulness, but because my body forced me to. I wasn't in pain exactly, but something wasn't right. I stood up, walked to the sink, splashed water on my face, and then it struck me. I couldn't remember the last time I had taken a full, real breath. Not just the shallow kind we do between thoughts, a full breath. The kind that fills the lungs, softens the belly, and reminds us we're alive. It sounds silly now, but in that moment, it felt terrifying. How many days, months, years even, had I spent holding my breath through life, rushing through errands, conversations, meals, and even moments that were supposed to be beautiful? I had mistaken movement for meaning. I had confused urgency with purpose. I sat down, not on a yoga mat or meditation cushion, but right there on the kitchen floor, and I breathed, slowly, once, twice, again. Each breath felt like something sacred returning to me. I didn't have words for it at the time, but something in me softened, as if the armor I'd been wearing had a crack in it, and light was beginning to slip through. That day didn't change everything overnight. I still rushed for things afterward. I still forgot my breath, my presence, my peace. But it planted a seed, a question. Why are we always in such a hurry? And what do we miss when we live that way? You see, I had spent much of my life measuring success by how much I could get done, how quickly I could respond, how many things I could juggle at once. But sitting on that floor, I realized something radical. Maybe I wasn't tired because of life itself. Maybe I was tired from the way I was living it. Have you ever had a moment like that? A small, quiet interruption that made you question everything. Your pace, your priorities, your idea of what matters. I didn't need a crisis to wake me up, just the realization that I had forgotten how to breathe. Sometimes awareness doesn't roar like thunder. It whispers. And that day, it whispered through my breath. Slow down. You are allowed to be here. Just here. That's where this story begins. This I didn't notice the noise at first, not because it wasn't loud, but because it had become familiar, like wallpaper I no longer looked at, like the hum of a refrigerator you only notice when it stops. There was the beep of notifications, text messages, calendar reminders, breaking news. There was the low rumble of the television in the background, even when no one was watching. There were sirens from the street, engines accelerating, the distant sound of someone's dog barking, and another yelling to call it back. There was always something, always someone, always motion. I remember thinking, is this just what life sounds like now? For years I accepted it. The noise, the speed, the pressure to keep up. I wore it like a second skin. I told myself I was just being efficient, productive, adaptable. But deep down, something in me was growing tired. Not just physically, but soul tired. And the worst part was, I didn't even realize it. I thought back to when I was a child, summers at my grandmother's cottage. There was no traffic there, no phones. The loudest thing was the wind pushing through the trees or the clink of ice in a glass of lemonade. Time moved differently there. Slower, yes, but also kinder, more generous. I remembered watching ants build their tiny homes in the dirt. I could sit still for what felt like hours, fascinated by something that would barely hold my attention now. And I remembered my grandmother's voice, always calm, never rushed. She moved like water, fluid, graceful, unhurried. When did I lose that rhythm? When did stillness start to feel like laziness? As I aged, the volume of the world seemed to rise, even though my own body was slowing down. My knees reminded me to be careful. My sleep became lighter. But the world outside was speeding up, and it expected me to keep pace. And so I tried. For decades I tried, until one day, after that moment on the kitchen floor when I realized I had forgotten how to breathe, I started to listen more carefully, not to what was around me, but to what was within me. And what I heard was silence, not empty silence, a live silence, like the kind that follows snowfall, or the pause between two waves, a stillness that had been waiting for me, buried under all the busy noise I had called normal. It was unnerving at first, like I had tuned out of a station everyone else was still listening to. But the more I stayed with it, the more I began to hear again. Not the world's chaos, but life's quiet invitations. The chirping of a single bird, the rustle of a curtain in the wind, my own heartbeat. And it made me wonder, when did we stop valuing quiet? When did we decide that faster is always better? Sometimes I think the world isn't loud because it needs to be. It's loud because it's afraid of what we'll hear in the quiet. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I was curious, so I turned off the television. I silenced the phone. I stepped outside one early morning, just as the sun began to color the trees in soft gold. No one else was around, just me, the wind, and the first breath of a new day. And in that hush, I remembered something I hadn't felt in years. Peace, real peace, the kind that doesn't demand anything from you. It just arrives when you finally make space for it. And all it took was the courage to listen, to the silence I had spent most of my life drowning out. It was a Wednesday. I remember that because Wednesdays used to be my errand days. Groceries, prescriptions, laundry, post office, all lined up like soldiers waiting to be checked off. But that particular Wednesday, something was different. I had woken up feeling a little off, not sick, not sad, just unwilling. There was no crisis, no weather emergency. I just didn't want to do anything, so I didn't. I made some tea, sat in my chair by the window, and stared. At first it felt awkward, like I was breaking some silent agreement I'd made with the world. An agreement that said, you must always be useful, always be doing, always be moving. But I stayed. I watched the sunlight shift across the floorboards. I listened to the ticking of the clock, something I hadn't noticed in years. I opened a book I had meant to finish months ago, but never did. And instead of reading it in a hurry, skimming pages like I was in some sort of race, I just sat with it. I didn't even turn on the lamp I usually used. Instead, I reached for a reading light I had bought on a whim after someone online recommended it for gentle, eye-friendly reading, especially helpful in the evening when natural light fades. It wasn't fancy, just practical. Soft amber glow, no harsh glare, perfect for slowing down. There's a link in the video description if you're curious. I only mention it because sometimes small things like the right light can make stillness feel more inviting. And that's exactly what happened. That simple act of sitting, reading, and doing absolutely nothing else felt like a kind of rebellion. Not against the world, but against that voice in my head that had always told me rest was only allowed after I had earned it. It reminded me of something I once heard in a Taoist teaching. The highest form of action is a non-action. Not in the sense of laziness or apathy, but in choosing not to force, not to chase, not to push against the natural rhythm of life. There I was, doing nothing, and yet I was more present than I had been in weeks. I wasn't solving problems. I wasn't making plans. I was simply allowing life to unfold in front of me, one quiet second at a time. And you know what surprised me the most? I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel like I was wasting time. In fact, I felt like time had finally stopped wasting me. When was the last time you did nothing? Not out of exhaustion, but out of intention. That day taught me something I'll never forget. Rest is not a reward. Stillness is not weakness. And doing nothing, when done mindfully, can become the most radical, restorative thing we do. So now, some evenings, I light that same lamp, pour some tea, and let the world spin without me for a while. It's amazing how full life feels when you stop trying to fill it. I used to think I had good eyes. I could spot a sale from across the store, notice when someone had rearranged the furniture, even catch a typo in a crossword puzzle. But what I didn't realize was that seeing, truly seeing, requires something more than sharp vision. It requires stillness. There was a morning, not long after I had started slowing down, when I stepped out onto the porch with my coffee in hand. It had rained the night before, and everything was glistening. Leaves, railings, even the spider web in the corner I usually brushed away without thought. But that morning, I saw it. The way the web held tiny droplets like strings of pearls, each one catching the early light and bending it into quiet color. I don't know how long I stood there watching it. 10 minutes, maybe more. I didn't move. I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't tell myself to get going. I just watched. And in that small moment, something shifted. It was as if the world had always been whispering to me in detail, but I had been too fast, too focused, too distracted to hear it. What else had I missed all those years? What other small miracles had passed right before my eyes, unnoticed, unloved, unseen? There's a kind of seeing that only arrives when we slow down. Not the hurried glances we cast while multitasking, not the quick once-over we give to flowers on the side of the road. I mean the kind of seeing that lets you notice the faint veins on a leaf, the slight tremble of your own hands, the way a loved one's eyes soften when they smile at you. When we move too fast, we begin to treat beauty like background noise. I remember reading a passage from Lao Tzu that said, "To see things in the seed, that is genius." It struck me, not because I considered myself a genius, but because I had never thought of seeing as a practice of attention, of reverence. And so I began to practice. I looked more slowly at familiar things, the teacup I used every day, the photograph of my mother as a young woman, the tree outside my window. I started to notice how the bark curled near the roots, how the light danced through the leaves at noon, how the branches seemed to shift with the seasons in a rhythm that never needed my permission. It's strange, isn't it? The slower we go, the more we see, not just with our eyes, but with something deeper. I began to sense textures in conversations, hear the unspoken hesitations in people's voices, see the tired joy in a stranger's posture. Slowness didn't dull my senses, it awakened them. Sometimes I wonder if we've mistaken speed for clarity, as if faster means we understand more. But that morning on the porch taught me the opposite. Only when I slowed down did the world truly come into focus. I don't believe we're meant to rush past beauty. I think we're meant to sit beside it, quietly, long enough for it to reveal itself. So now when I walk through my garden or down the street or through an ordinary aisle at the store, I try to pause, not for long, just enough to ask, what have I not noticed today? What's waiting to be seen? And more often than not, something answers. For most of my adult life, I believed I had to earn my worth. It wasn't something anyone said to me directly. It was something woven into the way people responded when I said I was keeping busy. The nods of approval, the smiles of respect. Productivity was like a badge. If you had a full calendar, you were doing something right. So I worked hard. I filled my days with tasks and errands, lists and goals. Even on weekends, I felt restless unless I was ticking something off. Organizing the garage, answering emails, planning ahead. I even turned relaxation into something measurable. 30 minutes of reading, followed by 10 of stretching, the feeling of being accomplished. But the strange thing was, no matter how much I did, that feeling didn't last. One evening I sat down to reflect, not because I had time, but because I was too tired to do anything else. I looked around my house. It was tidy, my chores were done, my inbox was empty. And yet, I didn't feel full. I didn't feel peaceful. I felt hollow, like a clock that keeps ticking but no longer tells the time. Why do we push ourselves so hard to be productive, even when no one's watching? Even when there's no real reward left? It hit me then that I had confused movement with meaning. I had built a life around activity, but not always around intention. There's a difference between doing something and doing something that matters. But when you're always moving, it's hard to tell the difference. You're too busy keeping up to ask, why am I doing this? Who is this really for? I think about the old saying, we are human beings, not human doings. It sounds like a cliche, but there's truth in it. Somewhere along the way, we traded being for doing, and we forgot how to just be with ourselves, with others, with time. That's the lie of productivity, that if you stop moving, you'll lose value. That rest makes you invisible. That slow means weak. But life has been gently, insistently teaching me otherwise. These days I measure time differently, not by how much I accomplish, but by how deeply I experience. A quiet cup of tea with both hands wrapped around it, a slow walk through the neighborhood, a phone call with someone who no longer remembers details, but remembers my voice. None of those things would show up on a productivity chart, and yet they nourish me in ways no checklist ever has. If you've lived long enough, you probably know this too, that the moments you remember most aren't the ones where you were efficient. They're the ones where you were present, when someone needed you, when you listened, not to fix, but to understand, when you laughed so hard you couldn't breathe, when you simply sat in silence with someone you loved. Have you ever looked back at your life and wondered what you were really working for? That's a question I come back to often, not to judge the past, but to free myself from repeating the same patterns in the time I have left. So now when I feel that familiar urge to prove myself through busy work, I pause. I ask, is this movement or meaning? And more often than not, I choose meaning, even if it's slower, especially if it's slower, because I've come to believe something that would have shocked my younger self. Sometimes the most productive thing we can do is rest. It's funny how something as ordinary as a cup of tea can carry so many stories. For years, tea was just background, something to sip while checking the news, folding laundry, flipping channels. It was part of the noise, not the moment. I never really tasted it. I never noticed how the warmth traveled through the cup into my palms, or how the steam curled like soft breath toward the ceiling. I was always doing something else. Multitasking, they call it, but really it's just a clever word for distraction. One morning, not long after I'd begun my journey toward a slower life, I found myself in the kitchen, reaching for my favorite mug, the chipped one, faded blue, the one that felt like mine in a way none of the others did. I brewed a pot of chamomile, no agenda, no rush, just tea. I carried it to the table by the window, where the light lands gently in the early hours, and I just sat there. No phone, no to-do list, no television humming in the background. Just me, the chair, the mug, the quiet. I held the cup in both hands, felt its warmth settle into my skin, listened to the soft tap of branches against the glass. The first sip was floral and light, with a whisper of honey. I could almost hear my breath exhale in rhythm with the steam. It was the first time in years that I had tea without multitasking, and it felt like a reunion with myself. Have you ever noticed how different something feels when it gets your full attention? It reminded me of a passage I once read about the Japanese tea ceremony, not just a ritual, but a philosophy, a way of bringing the sacred into the ordinary, of doing one thing fully, with presence, of making space for slowness, stillness, and grace. I'm not one for ceremonies, really, but I understood the spirit of it that day. When we slow down enough, even the smallest act becomes meaningful. A sip of tea, the rustle of a page, the silence between thoughts. And I realized something simple but powerful. It's not the tea that changes, it's the presence you bring to it. Multitasking had become my default mode for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to be with something, instead of just using it, to experience rather than consume. That morning, I didn't think about the emails I hadn't answered, or the groceries I hadn't picked up. I just let myself be there, with the tea, the light, the quiet pulse of being alive. No accomplishment, no productivity, just presence, and it was enough. Now I have a little ritual. It's not formal. I don't light incense or bow. I just make a cup of tea and promise myself this. For the next few minutes, nothing else exists. No scrolling, no planning, no splitting myself between 10 invisible threads. Just one thing, one moment, one breath. You'd be amazed what opens up when you give your full attention to something small. It's not about escaping life. It's about entering it more fully. So the next time you make tea or coffee or just sit by a window, ask yourself gently, can I be here just for now without needing to be anywhere else? Because maybe peace isn't a destination. Maybe it's a cup we've been holding all along, waiting for us to truly taste it. I used to walk with purpose, always with a goal in mind. The store, the mailbox, the appointment around the corner. My steps were brisk, focused, efficient, Just another way to get from one task to the next. But something shifted when I began to live more slowly. It started on a Tuesday afternoon. The sky was clear, not too warm, the kind of soft day that doesn't demand anything from you. I had nowhere to be, and for once, I didn't feel guilty about it. So I put on my shoes. Not the walking shoes I wore when I wanted to exercise, but just my soft, worn-in pair. The kind that had molded to the shape of my life. I stepped outside and began to walk. Not fast, not with earbuds in, just slowly. At first it felt strange, too quiet, too aimless. My body wanted to fall into old rhythms. March forward, look down, think ahead. But I caught myself. I slowed down. I looked up, and I began to arrive. Not at a destination, but in the moment. I noticed the way the light filtered through the leaves, how it flickered and played like a dance. I saw a snail inching along the edge of the sidewalk, undisturbed and unhurried. I heard wind chimes from a porch I'd passed 100 times but never really heard. I even saw the mailbox I usually rush by. This time, someone had placed a small bouquet of wildflowers inside it, just peeking out, a quiet kindness, waiting to be seen. What else had I been missing, simply because I was always in a hurry? Each step became less about going somewhere and more about being somewhere. I remembered something Lao Tzu said, "A good traveler has no fixed plans and is not intent upon arriving." That line used to puzzle me. Now I understand it in my bones. There's a kind of freedom in walking slowly, not because you're weak or tired, but because you finally stop chasing what isn't meant to be chased. You give the world a chance to speak. You give your soul space to breathe. I passed by neighbors I usually nodded to in passing. This time I stopped. We talked. Nothing profound, just weather, gardens, old dogs. But there was warmth in it, presence, connection. That kind of thing doesn't happen when you're rushing by. Sometimes we think slowing down is about doing less, but more often it's about experiencing more. More color, more texture, more laughter, more truth. Now, walking is no longer about fitness for me. It's about fullness. Fullness of moment, fullness of awareness, fullness of heart, and perhaps most of all, walking slowly has helped me arrive, again and again, not just at a place, but into my own life. When was the last time you walked without needing to get anywhere? If it's been a while, may I gently suggest this? Take one walk this week without a destination. Let your body move at the pace of curiosity. Let your breath be your guide. Let each step be a soft arrival, not because you have to, but because you can. There's a word I used to dread more than almost any other: useless. It crept in quietly like dust settling on an old photograph. Not all at once, but little by little, as the children grew up, as the phone rang less, as fewer people asked for my opinion, my help, my time. There came a day when I looked around and realized no one needed me the way they used to, and that did something to my sense of self. I had spent most of my life being useful. I was the fixer, the helper, the organizer. I filled gaps, smoothed problems, stayed up late when others were asleep, because that's what usefulness looked like. That's where I thought my value lived. But now the house is quiet. No one calls to ask how to roast a chicken or where to find their birth certificate. No one needs rides to soccer practice or help with math homework. The world kept moving, and I slowly, silently, stepped into the background. For a while I tried to resist it. I signed up for extra things, tried to stay in the loop, even offered advice that no one asked for. But deep down, I knew I wasn't fighting time. I was fighting the fear of not mattering. Until one night changed something. It was raining outside. I had just turned off the news. Too much noise, too many things I could no longer fix. I made a cup of tea and picked up a book that had been sitting by my chair for weeks. The light in the room was too harsh, so I reached for the little reading lamp I'd bought on a whim, one with a soft, amber glow that doesn't strain the eyes. Simple thing, really. But that light changed the whole mood. The room softened, my breath slowed, my shoulders dropped, and in that quiet pool of golden light, I read. Not because I had to, not to learn anything, just for the pleasure of being with the story. There's a link to that lamp in the description, by the way. I only mention it because it reminded me how little it takes to make a space feel like yours again. A small light, a warm chair, a moment that asks for nothing but your presence. That evening, I realized something unexpected. I didn't feel useless. I wasn't doing anything productive. I wasn't solving anyone's problems. But I felt whole, rooted, content. And that feeling didn't come from usefulness. It came from being. Have we confused our worth with our function? In Taoist thought, there's a beautiful idea that the most valuable part of a pot is the empty space inside it. It's not the clay that holds the meaning. It's the emptiness, the stillness, the room to hold what matters. What if aging is not about losing value, but becoming more spacious, more open, more present, less needed, but more aware? I don't rush to be useful anymore. I let people come when they want to. I listen more. I interrupt less. And sometimes I sit by my window with that soft light beside me, just watching the rain slide down the glass. That's when I feel most alive. Not because I'm needed, but because I'm here. So if you've ever felt like the world no longer has a clear job for you, let me say this. You are not a machine. You are not a task list. You are not only worthy when busy, you are a presence, and that is never useless. There's a kind of silence that hurts, and there's a kind of silence that heals. It took me a long time to know the difference. The house was never particularly loud, but it used to feel full, full of small things. The click of a door, the laughter down the hall, the sound of dishes being stacked after dinner. Even the quiet had a rhythm to it, like a gentle song you didn't know you were humming until it stopped. And then one day it did stop. It wasn't sudden. Life doesn't always end with a bang. Sometimes it just fades. One chair stays empty longer. One voice isn't heard as often. One phone call stops coming. The song slows. The spaces between the notes grow wider, and you're left with silence. Not peaceful silence, lonely silence. After my partner passed away, that silence became deafening. Not because the world was quieter, but because I had no one left to share the ordinary noise with. I didn't know how to sit in it. I'd leave the TV on for background, keep the radio playing while I cooked, even sleep with a podcast murmuring in the dark. I thought if I filled the space with sound, I wouldn't feel the absence. But absence doesn't go away when you cover it. It waits. One afternoon, I was dusting the bookshelf, more out of habit than necessity, when a small photo fell from between the pages. It was one I had forgotten, tucked away like a secret. The two of us, younger, laughing, holding hands without even thinking about it. You could almost hear the joy in the silence of that image. I sat down, held it close, and for the first time in a long time, I let the silence stay. No distractions, no noise. Just me, the photo, and the steady sound of my own breath. And that was when something shifted. I realized that silence wasn't empty. It was full, full of memory, full of love, full of all the things we never had to say aloud. There's a line I once read that stayed with me. It's the silence between the notes that makes the music. Grief, I think, is like that too. It's not just about what we lost. It's about what remains between all the moments, what still echoes in the quiet. That silence became a companion. I began to walk without headphones. I turned off the background noise. I let the hush of early mornings enter the kitchen before the kettle began to whistle. And somehow, in all that quiet, I started to feel held. Held by memory, held by stillness, held by the quiet rhythm of being alive. If you've ever lost someone, really lost them, you know what I mean when I say, the silence they leave behind isn't just silence. It's a conversation, a presence that no longer speaks in words, but still answers you in feeling. When was the last time you let yourself sit in silence? Not to escape the world, but to meet it? Now I think of silence the way a musician thinks of breath, not as the absence of sound, but as the space that allows meaning to arise. So I light a small lamp in the evening. I sit with a book, or sometimes nothing at all. I let the day grow dark around me. I let the stillness come. And in that stillness, I often hear a kind of music, quiet, gentle, only for me. It's the song between the memories, the space between what was and what still is. There's a certain pride people take in being busy. You can hear it in conversations, even in casual ones. How have you been? Oh, busy. Always something. It's almost like a badge of honor, proof that you're still relevant, still needed, still moving. And for a long time, I wore that badge too. Not just in the workplace, but in family life, in community roles, even in retirement. I felt guilty if I had nothing planned, as though time not filled was somehow time wasted. But what if we've been taught a lie? What if rest isn't laziness, but wisdom? I remember the first time I turned down a request that would have added one more obligation to my week. It wasn't a dramatic moment, just a neighbor asking if I could help organize a gathering. In the past, I would have said yes automatically, out of habit, out of guilt, out of not wanting to seem unproductive. But that day, something in me said no, not because I didn't care, not because I was too tired, but because I had started to value my own energy. I had begun to understand that just because something needs doing doesn't mean I have to be the one to do it. And that small refusal, it felt like freedom. It felt like resistance, not the loud kind, not fists in the air, but the quiet kind, the kind that whispers, I no longer measure my worth by how much I do for others at the expense of myself. It took me decades to learn that saying yes to everything is not kindness, it's erasure. When you never rest, never stop, never say no, you begin to disappear inside your own effort. In the world we live in, a world that praises constant motion and calls it ambition, choosing to rest can feel rebellious, especially as we grow older. We're told to stay active, to stay engaged, to stay relevant, as if slowing down means fading away. But I've come to believe the opposite. Rest sharpens presence. Rest returns us to ourselves. Rest is where we begin to hear the deeper rhythms beneath all the noise. In Taoist thought, there's the concept of wu wei, non-doing, or more accurately, effortless action. It doesn't mean sitting idle. It means moving in harmony with the flow of things, not forcing, not fighting, trusting that life has its own current. And sometimes the most powerful move is to float, not swim. One afternoon, I sat in my chair by the window while the world rushed by outside. Emails were being sent. Traffic was honking. News was breaking, but I was still, I was quiet, I was resting. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't failing. I was choosing. Have you ever thought of rest as a form of strength, not weakness? There's a reason fields lie fallow, a reason winter exists. Growth needs pause. Life needs breath. I am no longer interested in being impressive. I am interested in being real. So I rest. Not because I've earned it, not because I need permission, but because rest is a way of remembering who I am, without titles, without tasks, without noise. And in a world that constantly asks us to prove our value, I have found something quietly radical in simply sitting still. When I was younger, I thought time moved in a straight line. First came childhood, then growing up, then working, then retiring. A simple path, one direction, always forward. I thought of life like a staircase, each step taking me higher, until eventually I ran out of stairs. But now I no longer see time that way. Now I think of life as a circle, or better yet, as a garden, one that blooms and fades and blooms again in its own rhythm. It started with a tree. There's an old maple in my yard that I've watched for over 20 years. In the spring, it bursts open with green. In the summer, it offers shade. In autumn, it flares into gold, as if setting itself on fire in celebration. And in winter, it stands still, bare, silent, patient. I used to think winter meant it had died a little, but I've come to understand it's not death, it's preparation, it's rest, it's wisdom. And I began to ask myself, what season am I in? I used to be summer, full of energy, always saying yes, always in motion. Then I became autumn, letting go, watching things change, preparing for something quieter. And now? Now I think I've entered winter, but not the kind that's bitter or cold. This is a winter of clarity, of softness, of space, the kind of season that doesn't rush to prove anything anymore. And surprisingly, it feels good. There's a certain honesty in winter. No more pretending, no more performance, just the bones of who you are, just the shape of your truth. Sometimes I miss spring, the excitement, the beginning, the fresh bloom of everything. But I also know I carry spring inside me. I carry every season I've ever lived. I still laugh. I still cry. I still feel the sunshine on my skin and marvel at a bird's sudden flight. Age hasn't taken that from me. If anything, it has made those moments sharper, more precious. Slowing down has helped me feel the changing seasons within myself. Not as decline, but as movement. Not as loss, but as rhythm. Have you ever paused to ask yourself, what season is your soul in? Maybe you're in a spring of healing, or a summer of connection. Maybe you're in an autumn of letting go. Or maybe, like me, you've entered a winter where rest becomes revelation, where the silence holds more than words ever could. Taoist philosophy sees all things as part of nature, not separate, not superior, but deeply woven into it. Just like the tree, we are meant to change, to bloom, to shed, to rest, to rise, and none of it is wrong. None of it is wasted. These days, I sit more often under that maple. I let it teach me without saying a word. I watch its bare branches reaching toward the sky, not in grief, but in grace. It doesn't fear winter, and neither do I, because I know now there are seasons within me still. And even in the quietest one, life is not gone. It is simply becoming. There was a time when being alone felt like a punishment. The silence in the house would stretch too wide, the empty chair across the table too loud in its quietness. Meals eaten without conversation, evenings passed without touch. And though no one said it out loud, I felt the weight of absence in every room. I remember one night I sat on the edge of the bed and whispered to the dark, "Is this it now?" The truth was, I hadn't learned how to be with myself. Not fully. I had been surrounded by people most of my life. Family, friends, coworkers, neighbors. Noise had always filled the space. I never had to confront the quiet. But aging has a way of peeling things back. Layers of noise, layers of expectation, layers of distraction, until all that's left is you. Just you. And in the beginning, that felt like loss. But over time, slowly, gently, I began to notice something else. Stillness didn't always feel empty. In fact, it started to feel full, full of breath, full of memory, full of presence. I started taking quiet walks, not to clear my mind, but to be with it. I began sitting in the morning light with a cup of coffee, not waiting for someone to join me, but welcoming the silence as its own kind of guest. And little by little, I discovered that solitude isn't the same as loneliness. Loneliness is a hunger. Solitude is a homecoming. There's a sacredness in being alone. Not because no one wants you, but because you finally begin to want your own company. When was the last time you truly enjoyed being with yourself? Not as a backup plan, but as a choice. I began writing in a small journal again. Not grand thoughts, just quiet reflections. What I noticed, what I felt, what I remembered. And in those pages, I met someone I hadn't heard from in a long time. Myself. The version of me that doesn't perform, doesn't explain, doesn't rush to be understood. Just a person, breathing, being. In Taoism, there's an idea that the sage finds peace not in escape, but in harmony with the way things are. That means not resisting solitude, but embracing it, letting it reveal not what's missing, but what remains. And so I've stopped filling every silence. I've stopped fearing the empty chair. I've learned that being alone is not a failure of life. It is a deep, natural part of it. Now, some nights I light a candle, not for ceremony, but to mark the quiet. I sit without music, without distraction, and I let the stillness be enough, because it is. I don't need to be in conversation to be in connection. I don't need an audience to be real. I don't need another voice to feel seen. I have mine, and I've learned to listen. There was a time when my life was ruled by the clock. I knew the exact minute my alarm would go off, the precise time to leave the house so I wouldn't be late. Lunch breaks, meetings, deadlines, reminders. I moved through the day like a train on tracks, measured, efficient, on schedule. And even after retirement, that rhythm lingered. I still glanced at the clock more often than necessary, still felt anxious if I wasted an hour, still caught myself saying, "Where did the day go?" As if time had slipped through a hole I couldn't see. But something began to shift as I slowed down. One afternoon, I sat by the window, intending only to rest for a few minutes. The sun was warming the curtain, and a breeze stirred the leaves outside like they were whispering secrets. I meant to get up, but I didn't. I sat, and something strange happened. I stopped noticing the time, not in a panicked, forgetful way, but in a peaceful, present way. I was no longer measuring the moment, I was living it. That's when I realized there's more than one kind of time. There's clock time, the ticking, the counting, the structured minutes that tell us when to start and stop. But there's also something deeper. I don't know what to call it exactly. Soul time, maybe. Time that isn't measured in numbers, but in presence. Time that stretches when you're deeply in a story. Time that bends when you're watching a sunset. Time that disappears completely when you're holding the hand of someone you love. In Taoist thought, time is circular, not linear, like seasons, like breath, like the cycles of nature. There's no hurry in a tree growing, no urgency in the way the moon rises. Everything moves at the pace of enough. And so I began to let go of my obsession with making the most of every minute, because maybe the point isn't to use time, but to enter it, to step fully into it, like a warm bath, and let it hold you. Now my days are no longer carved into blocks. I eat when I'm hungry. I rest when my body says rest. I walk when the air feels good. I read not to finish, but to wander. I let the day unfold rather than trying to control it. Have you ever noticed how different time feels when you're truly present? Sometimes I'll be in the middle of watering my plants, and I'll realize I've been humming to them for 20 minutes, completely unaware. Sometimes I'll call a friend and we'll talk so long, the sky has changed colors before we say goodbye. That's the kind of time I live in now. The kind that doesn't rush. The kind that isn't afraid of pauses. The kind that doesn't ask me to prove anything. And I find it's far more generous, because when time is no longer an enemy to outrun, it becomes a companion to walk beside. So I've stopped asking, "What time is it?" and started asking, "What is this moment asking of me?" Sometimes the answer is rest. Sometimes it's gratitude. Sometimes it's simply to be still and listen to the wind outside my window. Whatever it is, I no longer fight it, because I've found something better than managing time. I've found a way to live inside it. I used to chase life, opportunities, people, dreams, even peace. I chased it all. I thought if I tried hard enough, stayed ahead, planned well, I could shape everything into what I wanted. And for a while that seemed to work. But slowly, quietly, life began teaching me something different. Things didn't always come when I called. Some doors didn't open, some people didn't stay, and some questions didn't get answered, no matter how much I tried to force them. At first I resisted. I pushed harder. I told myself I just needed better strategies, more effort, less softness. But then, something inside me began to soften anyway. It wasn't failure, it was surrender. Not the kind where you give up, but the kind where you give in to something deeper, something truer. I remember one evening, not long ago, when I finally felt the shift. The day had been uneventful. No big insights, no grand achievements, just a quiet sort of stillness. I had finished washing the dishes, fed the cat, turned off the porch light. Then I made a cup of tea and curled up in my favorite chair. I didn't reach for my phone. I reached for a book instead, one I'd been meaning to read for years but had always been too busy to begin. I turned on a small reading lamp beside me. It cast a warm, amber glow, soft, not too bright, just enough to illuminate the page without breaking the peace of the room. That kind of light makes all the difference, you know. There's a link to it in the description if you want to see the one I've grown fond of. And then I read. Not to finish the book, not to learn anything in particular, just to be there with the story, the silence, and myself. That's when it struck me. I hadn't chased this moment. I had let it come, and it had. So much of what I truly needed didn't arrive when I was striving. It arrived when I was still, when I stopped trying to make things happen and started making space for them to happen. Like friendships that deepened when I stopped performing. Like clarity that came when I stopped overthinking. Like peace that entered when I stopped forcing joy. Have you ever noticed how life begins to speak when you finally stop shouting? Letting life come to me hasn't made it smaller. It's made it gentler and strangely more full. Because what comes without pressure often comes with grace. Now I wake up without a plan. I move through the day not with control, but curiosity. I don't ask, what can I accomplish today? I ask, what is life offering me today? Sometimes it's a memory that surfaces while sweeping the floor. Sometimes it's a breeze that reminds me to open the window. Sometimes it's just the comfort of that same book waiting beside that same warm light. And you know what? That's enough. I no longer need to chase life. I trust it will meet me when I'm ready, when I'm open, when I'm quiet enough to notice it. So now I sit, I breathe, I read, I listen, and I let life come to me. If I had to describe what this part of life feels like, I wouldn't say slowing down. I'd say deepening, because that's what it is, really. Not less of life, but more of it. More presence, more noticing, more depth. Less noise, yes, but also less fear, less proving, less need to be anything other than who I am, right here. Slowing down hasn't made me invisible. It's made me more aware of the texture of each day, of the small joys that once passed me by, of the meaning tucked inside moments so ordinary I used to miss them entirely. Like the way the spoon sounds when it stirs honey into tea. Like the way afternoon light folds itself onto the floorboards. Like the way a single word, I'm here, can soften a heart that's waited too long to be seen. Meaning doesn't shout, it whispers, and it speaks a language only silence understands. There was a time I thought meaning came from big things, from success, from ambition, from impact. But now I know better. Meaning is not something we conquer, it's something we listen for. It lives in the spaces we've been taught to rush through, in the pauses, in the breath before we respond, in the time we spend simply being without agenda. Have you ever noticed that the most meaningful moments of your life weren't the ones you planned? They were the ones that unfolded slowly while you were paying attention. When someone held your hand without words, when the rain started falling right as you needed to cry, when the right memory came to comfort you at the exact moment you thought you were alone. Slowness opens the door to that kind of meaning, and once you've stepped through it, you can't go back. Not really. You might still move quickly at times, might still feel the pull of urgency now and then, but something in you will remain quiet, rooted, aware, because you've seen what lives on the other side of speed. You've tasted what it's like to live from the inside out. Now, I don't fill every hour. I don't rush to fill silences. I don't look for meaning in headlines or headlines in my meaning. I just listen. And what I hear most often is this: you are here. That is enough. That simple truth, that I am here and that life is unfolding even now, is the greatest gift slowness has given me. Not answers, not certainty, but presence. And in that presence, I found a kind of peace I never knew I was missing. So if you're still moving fast, if you're still chasing, still trying to catch something you can't quite name, pause just for a moment. Not to stop life, but to enter it. Slow down. Let the moment open. You don't need to know what comes next. You just need to be here. That, my friend, is the beginning of everything. If you've stayed with me this far, thank you, truly, not just for watching, but for sharing time, your quiet, your presence. In a world that moves so fast, giving someone your full attention is one of the rarest gifts. Maybe some of what I've said today felt familiar. Maybe some of it felt new. Or maybe you're still somewhere in between movement and stillness, between noise and meaning, between who you've been and who you're becoming. Wherever you are not alone. There's not about checking off another list or mastering stillness like a skill. It's about beginning again, gently each day, listening, breathing, choosing to live more deeply, not more quickly. And if all you take from this is one quiet moment, one pause, one breath, one tea sipping, light dimming, heart listening moment, then I believe it was worth it. You don't have to do everything. You just have to be here. And being here is everything. I hope this video has offered you a bit of calm, a bit of reflection, maybe even a quiet smile. I hope you'll come back. We'll sit together again, slowly, softly, like old friends. Until then, take care of your breath, take care of your time, and most of all, take care of yourself. I'll see you in the next story.